when my son handed his scholarship acceptance form to his stepfather and said, "Your signature is the one they trust," I didn't say a word. I didn't flinch. But inside, I shattered into 1,000 pieces. I had dreamed of that moment, the day my boy would get a scholarship, the day I'd sign with pride, knowing all my hard work had somehow helped him get there. But I wasn't even considered. I was just the man who used to pick him up every other weekend, who stopped showing up when life got too hard. And now, I was just a stranger with his blood. I walked away from that conversation with a form unsigned, a heart full of regret, and a storm quietly forming inside me. I had missed birthdays, school plays, doctor visits, not because I didn't care, but because I believed stepping back was better than being a reminder of a broken home. I thought I was protecting him, but he grew up seeing my absence as abandonment, not sacrifice. What followed was not revenge. It was revelation. I began to write, not to beg, not to explain, but to finally tell the truth. What started as a personal journal became something more, something his stepfather never saw coming. And when the world read my words, something shifted. Stay with me. This isn't just a story about a father who lost his place. It's about how silence speaks, how truth returns, and how one message, just one, can break through years of distance. My name is David Walker. I'm 52 years old, and for most of my life, I've worked with my hands. For 30 years, I was a mechanic. No days off, no sick days, no vacations longer than a weekend. Just the rhythm of tools clanking, engines humming, and sweat soaking through my shirt by noon. I built a reputation in my small town as the guy who could fix anything, except, it turned out, my own family. I met Claire when I was 25. She was studying art history, and I was just a guy with oil-stained jeans and no college degree. But somehow, we fit. When Michael was born, I thought I'd finally made something perfect. He had Claire's eyes, my stubborn chin, and a laugh that could break you open and put you back together in one sound. But marriages don't always crumble in big, dramatic moments. Sometimes they just erode, slowly, quietly. Claire wanted more stability, more structure, more ambition. I was good with cars, but not with promises I couldn't keep. I worked long hours to make ends meet, and I thought that was enough. It wasn't. We divorced when Michael was 7. The court granted her primary custody, and I didn't fight it. Maybe I should have. But back then, I thought it was better for him to have one steady home than to be shuffled around. I promised I'd still be there, every weekend, every birthday, every moment I could grab. For a while, I was. I'd drive 3 hours every Friday evening to pick him up. We'd get burgers, throw a football around, and I'd take him to the movies he loved. Sundays were always the hardest. Dropping him off felt like leaving a piece of myself behind. Still, I believed he knew I loved him. Then life happened. The shop I worked for downsized. I lost my job, and the only opening I could find was in another state. I took it, telling myself it was temporary. I promised Michael I'd be back soon. But soon turned into months, then years. Phone calls turned into voicemails. Voicemails went unanswered. I sent gifts, cards, letters. Sometimes he replied. Sometimes he didn't. When Claire remarried, everything changed. John was everything I wasn't. Educated, well-spoken, tech-savvy. He wore button-down shirts to PTA meetings and coached Michael's robotics team. He never raised his voice, and everyone loved him. Even Michael. I tried not to let it get to me. I wanted my son to have a good man in his life. But the truth? It hurt to be replaced. Not just in title, but in presence. There were photos, family pictures, where John stood behind Michael, arms on his shoulders, while I wasn't even mentioned. I wasn't angry at Michael. He was just a kid, doing what kids do, loving the ones who showed up. Still, I never stopped hoping. Every birthday, I'd send a gift. Every Christmas, a card. Sometimes I'd get a text. Thanks. Other times, nothing. I told myself he was busy. Teenagers are like that. But deep down, I feared he was slipping away, and I had no idea how to stop it. People ask why I didn't fight harder, why I didn't show up at his school or push to be part of his life. The truth is, I was ashamed. I didn't have a college degree. I didn't own a house. My job left my hands calloused and my knees aching. What could I offer a boy whose new father took him to museums and science fairs? So I faded out, not because I stopped caring, but because I thought I wasn't enough. I thought stepping back would make his life easier. Looking back, I see how wrong I was. Love isn't about being perfect. It's about being present. And I wasn't. But this story isn't about the past. It's about what happened when I came back, when I tried to fix what I had broken, only to realize that some things don't want fixing. Some doors don't open just because you finally knock. This is the story of the day my son asked another man for a signature and told me mine wasn't trustworthy. Even after I moved away for work, I tried to stay in Michael's life the only way I knew how. Through letters, care packages, and birthday cards. Every year, like clockwork, I'd send him something. A new baseball glove when he turned 10. A pocket knife when he turned 12, just like the one my father gave me. I wrote him stories about my childhood, told him about my first car, my first heartbreak. Things I wanted him to know, even if we couldn't share them in person. Most of the time, I didn't get a response. No texts, no calls, just silence. The first time it really stung was when I showed up at the hospital. Michael was 13, and I'd gotten a call, from Claire surprisingly, that he'd been taken in for a high fever. Without thinking, I left work, drove through the night, and walked into the ER looking like hell. The nurse at the front desk asked, "Are you family?" I said, "I'm his father." Before she could say anything, John appeared behind me, calm, polished. He said, "It's okay. I'm his stepfather. I'm on the paperwork." I stood there, speechless. Claire didn't even look at me. She just said, "He's resting. We've got it under control." No one asked me to leave, but I knew I wasn't welcome. I sat in the lobby for 4 hours, hoping to get 5 minutes. I never did. I told myself it was just a misunderstanding, a paperwork thing. But after that night, I stopped being informed at all. No more calls, no more updates. It got worse from there. When Michael was in 10th grade, I found out about his academic awards ceremony through a friend whose kid went to the same school. I showed up, sat in the back row. I remember wearing a button-up shirt for the first time in years, just to look like I belonged. The principal stepped up to the mic and said, "Tonight, we're honoring one of our most supportive parents, John Harding, for his unwavering dedication to Michael's education." Applause. Michael smiled. John stood and waved modestly. I watched my son wrap an arm around his stepfather for a photo that made the local paper. I wasn't even mentioned. It wasn't a betrayal you could point at. It wasn't loud or cruel. It was slow, methodical. The kind of erasure that happens when people stop saying your name. When I looked at their family photos online, I started noticing the patterns. John was always in the center, cutting the turkey, cheering at soccer games, standing behind Michael at graduation events. I wasn't even in the frame anymore. Not physically, not emotionally. At first, I tried to believe that maybe it didn't mean anything, that maybe Michael just didn't like pictures, that maybe it wasn't his idea. But then came the Christmas card. It was a glossy trifold with gold lettering. Wishing you warmth and family this holiday season from the Hardings. There was a photo of the three of them in matching sweaters. Michael called John Dad in the caption. I wasn't mad. I was numb, because by then I had realized the truth. John hadn't just filled a role, he had rewritten mine. And Michael didn't stop him. I don't know when the shift happened. When my son stopped looking for my letters, stopped caring about my birthday calls. Maybe it was easier for him to pretend I wasn't part of the story anymore. Maybe Claire encouraged it. Maybe John never had to say a word. Just showed up, day after day, until presents became power. I kept sending gifts, even when they came back unopened. I kept writing, even when I didn't know if he read a single word. Because that's what you do when you love someone more than your pride. You keep showing up, even when you're not seen. But deep down, I started to wonder, was I fighting for something that no longer existed? Was I a father, or just a reminder of what used to be? Michael turned 16 that year, and against every instinct I had to stay out of the way, I showed up at his birthday party. Claire hadn't invited me, but she hadn't explicitly told me not to come either. I figured that had to mean something. I bought him a watch. Classic, nothing flashy. Just something a man gives his son when he's ready to say, "You're growing up now." I wrapped it in a plain box with a note inside. This used to be mine. Wore it every day until I met your mother. Figured it's your turn now. Traffic was brutal. An accident on the freeway had me sitting still for almost an hour. By the time I pulled into their neighborhood, the sun had dipped low, and party sounds floated from their backyard. Music, laughter, the pop of a soda can. I walked through the gate, gift in hand, and froze. Everyone was already there. The decorations were elaborate. Streamers, a rented photo booth, even a local DJ. John stood by the grill, flipping burgers with ease, surrounded by friends and neighbors. Claire was nowhere in sight, but I recognized most of the faces. They didn't recognize me, or maybe they pretended not to. Michael saw me from across the yard. His face didn't light up. He didn't run over. He didn't even smile. Instead, he raised an eyebrow and called out, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Hey, my uncle's finally here." Some people laughed. I laughed too, because what else do you do when your son decides to make you a punchline? He didn't mean uncle in the affectionate, playful sense. He meant it as a distance, a jab, a way to tell the room, and me, that I wasn't really part of the story anymore. I walked up, handed him the box. He took it without looking inside, set it on a table already crowded with gifts wrapped in shinier paper. "Thanks," he said flatly, then turned to talk to a friend. I stood there for a while, trying to find someone to talk to. The guests floated past me, polite smiles, tight nods. One woman whispered to another, "That's the biological dad," like I was a specimen behind glass. John didn't say anything directly to me, but his body language said enough. He kept a careful distance, always between me and Michael. He laughed louder when Michael was near, touched his shoulder during group photos. He played the part well, too well. Eventually, Claire sent a text, Not a hello, not a thank you, but next time, please let us know in advance. It helps avoid awkwardness. I wanted to reply, it helps who? But I didn't. I put my phone back in my pocket and stared at the grass for a long time. The strangest part wasn't the coldness. I expected that. It was the quiet condescension, the unspoken suggestion that I had no right to be there, that I was a disruption, a reminder of something inconvenient, an interruption to a perfectly curated life. They had replaced me without ever saying the words. And now, I was just the man who used to show up. When the cake came out, I stepped back, stood near the fence. Michael blew out the candles, and John put a hand on his back, proud and fatherly. I wondered if Michael even remembered the birthday when I built him a model train from scratch, or the one when I drove 6 hours just to be there for breakfast. Maybe those memories had been overwritten, like old files on a hard drive. When the party ended, I left without saying goodbye. I got in my truck, watched the house shrink in my rearview mirror, and felt something close up inside me, like a door I wasn't sure would open again. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I just sat in the dark and stared at the ceiling, wondering when I stopped being a father and became just another face in the crowd. The accident happened on a Wednesday. Just another day under the hood of a car, until the hydraulic jack gave out and my right leg took the full weight of an old Chevy pickup. Compound fracture, surgery, steel rod, 6 months of physical therapy. And then a note from my doctor. Not cleared for mechanical work. Permanent restriction. That was it. 30 years of wrenching and sweating gone in an instant. No farewell party, no handshake. Just a box of tools I couldn't use anymore, and a life I didn't know how to live. For the first few weeks, I stayed in my rented room outside of Tulsa, trying not to think about what came next. But silence is a cruel companion, especially when regret keeps you company. I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. Grainy shots of Michael at 5, holding up a worm he found in the backyard. A blurry video of us playing catch on a windy afternoon. Memories that felt like someone else's life. So I made a decision. With my savings and a small disability payout, I moved back to my old town. Found a modest apartment above a shuttered bookstore, just a 10-minute drive from where Michael now lived. I didn't tell Claire. I didn't tell anyone. I just showed up and hoped that proximity might open a door that distance had kept shut. The first text I sent was simple. Hey, I'd love to catch up. Maybe grab dinner sometime this week? It took him 2 days to reply. Yeah, sure. But can John come? He's got time Wednesday. I stared at the message for a long time, unsure how to respond. But I didn't want to blow the chance. So I wrote back. Of course. Wednesday works. We met at a mid-range diner downtown. I wore a button-down shirt I hadn't touched in years. Michael arrived first. Taller now, lean and sharp-featured like his mother. Then came John, in a blazer and jeans, perfectly composed. They sat across from me in the booth, Michael sipping Coke, John ordering a grilled salmon like he belonged everywhere. I tried to ask Michael questions. How was school? What colleges was he looking at? What did he want to study? He gave me polite answers, short and surface level. Every time I tried to go deeper, mention a story from when he was little, bring up something I'd sent, John would chime in with context or a quick change of subject. It wasn't rude. It was surgical. Every effort I made to connect was gently redirected, like water hitting a wall. I barely touched my food. My hands trembled under the table. At the end of the meal, I reached for the check, but John already had his card out. "No need," he said. "I've got it." Michael didn't argue. He just stood, thanked me for coming, and walked out with John. That night, I stared at my phone, wondering if I'd imagined the distance. I told myself it was just awkward. First meetings always are. So I tried again. I sent another message the next week. "I found a book I think you'd like. Just mailed it to you. Let me know what you think." No reply. 2 weeks later, I got a small box in my mail slot. Inside was the same book I'd sent, still in its wrapping. No note, just the unopened package, returned without a word. I kept sending messages, not often, just enough to let him know I was still here. Sometimes they were read, most were not. I tried calling once. It rang twice, then went straight to voicemail. I told myself to be patient, to give him space. Maybe he needed time to adjust. But deep down, I felt it again, the slow sting of being erased. I started walking by his school sometimes, not to stalk him, but to remind myself he was real, that he still existed somewhere beyond the silence. One afternoon, I saw him through the window of a coffee shop, laughing with a group of friends. He looked happy, comfortable, whole, and I felt like a ghost drifting through a town that had forgotten my name. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even jealous. I just wanted a seat at the table, a conversation, a moment, something to prove I hadn't always been absent. But every step I took felt like one too late. Every attempt to reconnect only confirmed the truth I feared most. He didn't need me anymore. It started with a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I was having coffee with an old friend from the shop, Rick. We hadn't seen each other in years, and when he heard I was back in town, he insisted we meet. We talked about old coworkers, the accident, how strange it was not to wake up at 5:30 a.m. anymore. Then, midway through his second cup, Rick said, "I was surprised to hear what happened at the garage, by the way. Never figured you for a drinker." I blinked. "What?" "You know, the thing with you getting fired for showing up drunk. That's what John said at the neighborhood barbecue last month." The words hit like a gut punch. "He said what?" Rick looked confused. "Yeah. He told a few people that's why you left. Said it was sad, but at least Michael had someone stable now." I sat back, stunned. "That's not true. I broke my leg under a truck. There's a medical report, surgery, therapy. I didn't drink on the job. I've never been drunk at work a day in my life." Rick raised his hands. "Hey man, I believe you. I do. Just telling you what I heard." The conversation continued, but I wasn't there anymore. My mind was spiraling. I thought back to every awkward glance, every tight-lipped smile at Michael's party, every person who looked at me like a failed project. It all made sense now. They weren't just being polite, they were being cautious. Because John had already written my backstory for them. The rage simmered beneath my ribs, not wild or violent, just cold and sharp. I had made peace with the idea that Michael might prefer John. But to know the man had actively poisoned my character, that was different. That was deliberate. I drove home that day in silence, fists clenched around the steering wheel, thinking of all the ways I could confront him. But I didn't go to John. I went to Claire. I hadn't spoken to her in months, not since Michael's last birthday. But I still had her number. I texted, "Need to speak with you. It's important." No response. I called straight to voicemail. The next day, I tried again. Claire, I heard something serious. I need to clear it up, for Michael's sake. Nothing. Finally, I sent an email. Long, careful, not angry. I laid out what Rick had told me, explained the truth about the accident, attached a scanned copy of my medical release and the doctor's note. The email bounced back. Blocked. I tried one last time through Michael. Hey, I know we haven't talked much, but I wanted to clarify something. Someone told me John's been saying I was fired for drinking. That's not true. I had a workplace accident. There's documentation. Just wanted you to hear it from me. He read the message, didn't reply. A week later, I ran into him at the grocery store. He was alone, browsing cereal boxes. I approached, cautiously. Hey, Michael? He looked up. Oh, hey. I sent you a message about something serious. He nodded. Yeah, I saw it. Silence stretched between us. So, I asked. He shrugged. I mean, I don't really know what happened, and it doesn't matter much now. I just know John's been there for me. He listens. He gets me. Are you saying I don't? Michael didn't answer right away. Then, with a kind of gentleness that hurt worse than cruelty, he said, I don't think you ever really tried. I stood there, rooted to the tile floor, wondering how many years of absence it took to erase all the ones I showed up for. Wondering how long John had been softly rewriting my story until even Michael couldn't tell the difference between fiction and memory. I wanted to scream, to tell him everything about the pain, the hospital, the months of rehab, the fear of never being useful again. I wanted to hand him every unopened letter, every returned package. I wanted to ask why none of that mattered, but I didn't, because I knew what he'd say. He'd say John was there, and I wasn't. That night, I pulled out the watch I'd given Michael at his 16th birthday, the one he never wore. I stared at it for a long time, turning it over in my hand. It didn't matter that I'd never been drunk at work. It didn't matter that I had the proof. Because by now, the damage wasn't just done. It had been accepted. And I wasn't fighting a lie anymore. I was fighting a belief. I found out about the award ceremony through the school's public website. Senior Honors Night, it read, celebrating our graduating class and their outstanding achievements. Michael's name was listed under Academic Excellence, Math Olympiad finalist, and a National Leadership Award. He was everything I hoped he'd become. Smart, driven, disciplined. I decided to go, not to make a scene, not to demand recognition, just to watch, just to be there, even if he didn't know it. I arrived early and took a seat in the back row of the auditorium. Parents filed in around me. Dads in collared shirts, moms in modest jewelry, kids fixing their ties nervously in the aisles. The air buzzed with pride. As I flipped through the program, I scanned the acknowledgments section. Names of parents, guardians, and mentors. Michael's read, Claire Harding and John Harding. That was it. No mention of me, not even a footnote. I stared at the page for a long time. I knew, logically, I wasn't his legal guardian. But emotionally, spiritually, didn't those years of being there, before John ever entered the picture, count for something? The ceremony began. I clapped politely, even when it felt like every cheer dragged another nail into my chest. When Michael walked across the stage, tall and composed, the room erupted. John stood to applaud. Claire wiped a tear. I stayed seated. I left before it ended. I couldn't bring myself to look Michael in the eye. What would I have said anyway? Nice speech. I'm glad your other dad got listed. Back in my apartment that night, I pulled out the envelope I had prepared for his birthday, his 18th. It held a handwritten letter and a simple photo of the two of us from when he was 5. We were at a state fair, his face painted like a lion, me holding a corn dog in one hand and his tiny fingers in the other. In the letter, I wrote, "Michael, 18 is a big year. You're legally a man now, but you've carried strength and intelligence far beyond your age for a long time. I'm proud of you, more than you know. I know I haven't been there the way I should have. I've made mistakes I can't take back. But I love you. Always have. Always will. Love, Dad." I mailed it the next morning. 3 days later, it came back. Same envelope, my handwriting. Red stamped across the front. Return to sender. Inside, the letter hadn't been opened. Taped to the outside was a sticky note. 4 words. That was all. Don't need this anymore. I stared at the note for an hour. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I did. I'd spent years hoping a gesture would matter. A letter, a gift, a word. But none of it touched him. I'd become a ghost he'd outgrown, a shadow he'd rather not revisit. That night, I went to my closet and pulled out the box, where I'd kept every draft, every unsent version of letters, every copy I'd made in case I ever needed to remember what I said. It was full, almost bursting, over 10 years of words that never reached him. I took it all outside to the alley behind the building, lit a match, and watched it burn. Pages curled in the flame like dying leaves. Ink bubbled and blackened. Years of trying, reduced to ash. A neighbor stuck his head out the window and asked if I was okay. "I'm good," I said. "Just cleaning house." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table until morning, staring at my reflection in the window. For the first time, I saw it clearly. Not a man waiting for forgiveness, but a man who had run out of reasons to wait. I whispered the words out loud, not for drama, not for pity, but because I needed to hear them. If I'm not good enough to be his father, then what do I have left to lose? It was a Tuesday afternoon when Michael knocked on my door. I hadn't seen him in weeks, months maybe, not since the grocery store. I was in the kitchen rinsing a coffee cup when I heard the knock, firm and quick. I opened the door, half expecting a neighbor, or maybe the mailman with another wrongly delivered package. But there he was. He stood on the threshold, backpack slung over one shoulder, wearing a hoodie from some college I didn't recognize. His hair was longer than before, his face leaner. He looked like a man, my son, grown and unfamiliar. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I replied, cautious. He didn't ask to come in, just handed me a folder. "This is for school, scholarship stuff. They need a parent's signature. Figured I'd bring it by." My hands trembled slightly as I took it from him. I flipped through the pages, documents from the university, acceptance letters, financial aid breakdowns. There it was, a single line at the bottom. Parent, guardian signature. I stared at it like it was a ticket to redemption, a chance to be part of something real, something that mattered. My name would be on a form tied to his future. Proof, however small, that I wasn't completely erased. "Of course," I said softly. "Let me grab a pen." I turned toward the table, already reaching into the drawer, when he spoke. "Actually," he said, voice uneven. I paused, looked over my shoulder. He shifted his weight. "I don't think you need to sign it." I frowned. "Why not?" He cleared his throat. "I already asked John. He signed it yesterday." The silence between us was sudden and deafening. He kept talking. They just needed a guardian. And, well, it made more sense. He's more involved. I held the pen in my hand, its tip hovering above the blank line, and felt my fingers begin to curl around it tighter. But I didn't write. I didn't move. Michael added his signature. People trust it. Schools, banks. It just looks better. Looks better, I echoed, not even meaning to speak. He didn't respond. I put the pen down, slowly closed the folder. My heartbeat was loud in my ears, but my face stayed still. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just nodded once, barely, and handed the folder back to him. He took it with a quick, nervous motion. I should get going. Yeah, I said, my voice flat. He turned to leave, then paused. Thanks for understanding. I didn't answer. I watched him walk down the hall and disappear around the corner. The echo of his footsteps faded, and the silence returned. I stood in the same spot for a long time, staring at the empty doorway. That signature line, it wasn't just ink, it was presence, permission, legitimacy. And I'd been told, again, I wasn't the one who mattered. I sat down at the table, my arms resting against the wood, and stared at the grain patterns as if they could explain something. I thought of every scraped knee I'd kissed, every toy I'd fixed, every bedtime story I'd read before the divorce. None of it was enough. I wasn't enough. I stayed there until the sun dipped below the buildings outside, casting long shadows across the floor. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't move. I just sat in the dark, trying to breathe through a pain so sharp it felt like my chest would split open. The final insult wasn't cruel. It was clinical, efficient, delivered with a kind of cold logic that's hardest to argue with. He's more involved. He's more trusted. His name looks better. And maybe, in the eyes of the world, that was true. But I wasn't the world. I was his father. Or at least I used to be. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the edge of my bed, the folder still on the table where I dropped it. The room was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that creeps into your bones and reminds you just how alone you really are. At some point past midnight, I got up and opened the old dresser in the corner of my apartment. Bottom drawer, right side, behind a stack of old tax forms and insurance letters. There it was, the box. I pulled it out, set it on the floor, and lifted the lid. Inside were envelopes, dozens of them. Some sealed, some opened and returned, others never sent. Years of letters I had written to Michael. Some on birthdays. Others after I saw a movie I thought he'd like. One I wrote the day I moved back into town. Another after I saw him at the diner with John. Notes I never had the courage to deliver. Words I thought might matter someday. I took them all out and laid them across the floor like fallen leaves. I picked one at random, dated 4 years ago. Michael, I know I missed your game. I saw the photos online. You looked strong. I'm proud of you, always proud. Even when I'm not there, I'm watching. I'm hoping. I'm trying. I read another. Your 13th birthday's coming up. I still remember the look on your face when we got stuck on that Ferris wheel. You acted scared, but I knew you loved it. You always liked the view from above. You've always been brave, even when you didn't know it. Each letter was a thread back to a version of myself that believed time could fix things. That words, even written in solitude, might find their way home. But none of them had. I sat back against the wall, knees pulled up to my chest, surrounded by paper ghosts. For the first time in years, I picked up a fresh notebook. Not for Michael, not for anyone, just for me. And I began to write, not a letter, a confession. I wrote about the accident that ended my career, the day I left town, the guilt I carried for missing birthdays, for not fighting harder. I wrote about the time I saw him at the park and couldn't bring myself to say hello because I didn't want to embarrass him. I wrote about every unopened envelope, every return to sender, every dinner I ate alone on a holiday meant for family. And then I wrote about the other man, not with bitterness, not with hate, just with truth. How it felt to be replaced piece by piece. How I watched another man slip into the spaces I used to occupy. How the world smiled at him. And how Michael followed that smile like it was a lighthouse guiding him away from me. I wrote until my hand cramped, until tears blurred the ink, until morning light crept through the window and settled softly across the mess I had made. And in that quiet haze of sunrise, something shifted. I realized I wasn't writing to Michael anymore because I had finally admitted the truth. He may never read a word I said. He may never come back. And I couldn't keep living my life in the pause between rejection and hope. But I also couldn't erase what I felt, what I knew. I had loved him, deeply, imperfectly, but truly, and that counted for something, even if no one else saw it. That morning, I gathered the letters into a stack and placed them gently back in the box. But the notebook, that stayed on the table. For the first time, I wasn't trying to reach out. I was trying to understand who I had become after all the reaching failed. In the weeks that followed, I kept writing. Every morning, before the sun broke over the rooftops, I'd pour a cup of coffee, sit at the kitchen table, and pick up the notebook. It had become a ritual, not a plea for reconnection, but a reckoning. A way to speak my truth, even if no one would ever hear it. After a month, the notebook was full. I didn't reread it. I didn't edit or correct anything. I just closed it and sat quietly, staring at the cover. And then I made a decision. I went to a local print shop and had the entire journal transcribed, formatted, and bound. Nothing fancy. No title, no cover design, just a plain paperback with a black spine and white pages. I ordered one copy. Just one. I had it delivered to myself. I told the clerk it was for a personal memoir. She smiled and asked, "Are you publishing it?" I shook my head. No, just archiving. It felt strange to hold something so full of pain, so dense with failure and memory, and treat it like a book. But in a way, that's what it was, a record. A map of all the roads I'd taken that led me to this quiet, lonely place. It didn't fix anything, but it made me feel real again. That same week, I made another decision. I found a lawyer, an old friend of my brother's, who specialized in defamation cases. We met in a quiet office above a pharmacy. I brought medical records, employment letters, and a sworn affidavit from my former boss. "I'm not looking to sue," I told him. "I just want something on file, a statement, something official." He raised an eyebrow. "Why not press charges?" "Because I'm not interested in punishing anyone," I said. "I just want the truth to exist somewhere." He nodded, and we filed the statement. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my name, not for the world, but for myself. After that, I started going back to the house, not their house, not the one with the manicured lawn and the 3-car garage. My house, the one I'd held on to all these years, like a worn photograph. It had been sitting vacant for over a decade, collecting dust and memories. I never had the heart to sell it. Now, I began cleaning it up, bit by bit. I scrubbed the windows, repaired the front steps, replaced cracked tiles in the kitchen. I wasn't planning to live there. Not really. But something about restoring it felt necessary, and I saved Michael's room for last. When I opened the door, the air was thick with dust and stillness. The walls were still blue, decorated with peeling posters of dinosaurs and race cars. A small bookshelf leaned in the corner, still holding a few old picture books and a broken walkie-talkie. I didn't change anything. I just cleaned. I washed the sheets, vacuumed the rug, wiped down the dresser. I framed one of our old photos and placed it on the nightstand. I found his old baseball glove in the closet and set it beside the bed. I left the room exactly as it had been, not as a shrine, not as a desperate attempt to lure him back, but as proof that he had existed here, that we had existed. And when I finished, I stood in the doorway, breathing in the scent of dust and memory, and I whispered to no one, "This is still yours, even if you never come back." For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting to be seen. I was just choosing not to disappear. The notebook sat on my table for 3 days before I touched it again. I didn't know what I was waiting for. Maybe courage, maybe clarity, maybe just the kind of stillness that comes when grief settles into something colder, something that doesn't burn anymore, just hums quietly beneath your ribs. Then one morning, I opened my laptop and created a blog. It took less than 5 minutes. A simple title, Letters I Never Sent. I uploaded the digital version of the journal, unedited, unfiltered. No introduction, no explanation. Just entry after entry, each one stamped with a date and left to speak for itself. It wasn't for Michael. Not anymore. It was for me. For the version of myself that needed to put the truth somewhere it couldn't be ignored. I expected maybe a few views. Maybe someone would stumble across it and move on. But within a week, everything changed. The first comment came from a woman in Ohio. "I don't know you, but I feel like I do. My father left when I was 10. I always thought he didn't care. I never considered he might have just been broken. I'm crying. Thank you." Then came another. This made me call my dad. We haven't spoken in 6 years. I didn't know what to say, so I just sent him the link. By the end of the second week, the blog had gone viral. Thousands of views turned into hundreds of thousands. I watched in disbelief as the hashtag #LetterFromDad began trending on social media. People quoted pieces of the entries, shared photos of their fathers, or posted screenshots with captions like, "Read this if you've ever wondered what your dad didn't say." Journalists reached out. One small podcast read the first 3 entries aloud, complete with soft piano music in the background. I didn't answer the emails. I wasn't trying to be interviewed. I wasn't trying to be anything. But the comments kept coming. "You wrote what my father never could." This helped me forgive him. I wish I could send this to my son. I read this and cried like a child. I spent hours just scrolling through the responses, not because I needed validation, but because I needed to know that someone out there understood, that I hadn't been shouting into a void all these years. And strangely, for the first time in over a decade, I didn't feel alone. The blog became a quiet corner of the internet where people came not to argue, not to rage, but to reflect. It wasn't polished. It wasn't perfect. It was just honest. Somewhere in the 3rd week, someone sent me a message. "Are you David, the man who wrote the journal?" I hesitated before answering. "Yes," they replied. "My name is James. I showed this to my daughter. We haven't spoken since her wedding. She called me after reading your story. I just wanted you to know. You gave us a bridge. That message hit harder than any others, because that's what I had lost with Michael. A bridge. Something between us that once connected, however fragile, now burned down. I didn't know if he had read it. I didn't know if he ever would, but the thought lingered. What if someone showed him? What if he recognized the words? Not because I wanted him to cry, but because I wanted him to understand that I never stopped caring, that I never stopped trying. One night, I refreshed the blog and saw a new comment, short and unsigned. I think I understand now. There was no name, no context, just those 5 words. It could have been anyone. But I sat staring at the screen for a long time, wondering if maybe, just maybe, it had come from the one person who mattered most. When the blog reached over 1 million views, the story could no longer exist in quiet corners of the internet. It hit the mainstream. A regional news outlet ran a feature titled, "The Father Who Wrote What Thousands Couldn't Say." They didn't use my last name, but the details were there. The timeline, the letters, the story of the absentee dad who returned too late, only to find there was no seat left at the table. John must have seen it, because the following week, he posted a carefully worded message on his professional LinkedIn page. It was framed as a reminder about responsible storytelling, peppered with phrases like respecting boundaries, presenting facts, and acknowledging all sides. He never mentioned my name, but the message was clear. He was preemptively defending himself. Only it didn't work, because people started talking. First, it was Michael's former math tutor. She posted a comment on the blog saying, "I remember David from when Michael was in 6th grade. He used to wait in the car during sessions, always early, always quiet. He'd bring Michael snacks and leave notes in his backpack." Then came the neighbor from Claire's old street, someone I barely remembered. David was the one who painted the fence after the storm. I saw him, middle of the summer, shirt soaked, just working while everyone else stayed cool indoors. I remember thinking, he's trying so hard to stay visible. Then a photo surfaced. It was posted by a retired middle school teacher named Ms. Carlton. The caption read, "I took this photo on a field trip years ago. Michael had a meltdown, homesick, scared, running a fever. We couldn't reach Claire or John. David showed up within 30 minutes. I watched him sit with his son, hold him like it was the only thing anchoring him to the world. This was the man they said wasn't present. The image was blurry but unmistakable. Me, kneeling beside a crying Michael, arms wrapped around him, forehead pressed to his. I remembered that day. He'd begged not to go on that trip. Claire insisted. I had taken off work just in case. When the school called, I didn't hesitate. Now the world saw that moment. And something shifted. People began questioning John's version of events. What started as admiration for a devoted stepfather turned into curiosity. How had David become the villain in this narrative? Why had no one heard his side until now? Claire tried to control the damage. At first, she released a short statement. We ask for privacy and compassion for our son during this time. But it backfired. People began digging deeper. One blogger compiled timelines, matching dates from the journal to public records, photographs, and school newsletters. Everything checked out. My story wasn't just emotional, it was provable. Then came the silence. Claire stopped responding to emails. John deleted his statement. Their social media pages went private. But the momentum was already too strong. Podcasts featured debates about fatherhood, redemption, and narrative control in blended families. Therapists wrote threads about the emotional cost of quiet alienation. Fathers and sons started speaking again. Stories poured in. And through it all, I remained still. I didn't post a follow-up. I didn't defend myself or gloat. Because the truth didn't need me to shout anymore. It was standing just fine on its own. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, journal beside me, tea going cold, I refreshed the blog and saw a new message. I used to think you left because you didn't care. But I see now. You left because you were pushed out slowly, piece by piece. I'm sorry no one noticed until now. No name, no photo. But I read it over and over, letting the words wash over the years of silence like a tide rolling in. John's version of perfection had begun to crack, and in those cracks, the truth had found its voice. Michael read the blog in silence. No one told him to. No one needed to. He had seen the headlines, heard the whispers at school. His friends shared the link like it was some kind of viral confession. For days, he ignored it, let it sit unopened in his messages, unread in his browser. But late one night, when the house was quiet and the only sound was the soft hum of the fridge downstairs, he clicked. He didn't expect to feel anything, but he read the first entry, then the second, then the third, and then he read all of it. It took hours. At one point, he stopped to wipe his face, surprised by tears he hadn't realized were falling. He read about the letters, the hospital visit, the drive across state lines. He remembered pieces, small flashes of memory buried under years of other people's versions. A broken toy suddenly fixed before school, the peanut butter sandwich with the crusts cut off, the note hidden in his backpack the day he had that math test. He had forgotten. Or maybe he had let himself forget. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he got in his car and drove. Not to the house where he lived now, not to the life perfectly arranged with neat boundaries and curated routines, but to the place he hadn't seen in years. The old house, David's house. It looked smaller than he remembered. The paint had faded in spots. The porch creaked under his steps. But the lights were on. He didn't knock. He just stood outside, staring at the door, unsure if he had the right to open it. Then something drew him to the side, around the back, where he knew the sliding glass door would still be, where he used to sneak out with his flashlight and plastic dinosaurs. And that's when he saw it. His room. Through the window, everything was the same. The blue walls, the posters, the bookshelf, even the old glove on the nightstand. He leaned closer, breath fogging the glass. It hadn't changed. Not because David couldn't move on, but because he hadn't wanted to forget. Michael felt something crack open in his chest. Not regret. Not exactly. More like realization. The kind that comes when you finally understand what someone gave you, long after you dismissed it. He stepped back, hands shaking. He didn't go inside. Instead, he drove home. And just before dawn, he sent a text. If you're free, dinner tomorrow? No name, no emoji, just 10 words. David saw the message that morning. He didn't reply. He read it once, then again, then left his phone on the table and walked outside, like movement would make it more real. He stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the pale sky, unsure if this was some kind of cruel test, a delayed trick of the heart. But the words were there, waiting on the screen, patient and still. He didn't answer. He didn't want to risk scaring it away. The next evening, As the sun dipped low behind the buildings, David dressed carefully. Not like he was meeting someone new, not like he was being evaluated, but like he was showing up to something sacred. He wore the same shirt he'd worn to Michael's last school ceremony. This time, not to disappear into the crowd, but to be seen. He arrived at Claire's house just after 6. The door opened before he knocked. Michael stood there. No smile, no words, just eyes that looked older than they had any right to be. They stood like that for a long second. Then Michael stepped aside. "Come in," he said. David entered. The air smelled like roasted chicken and garlic bread, Claire's old recipe. There were 2 plates on the table. Nothing elaborate, no candles, no speeches. They sat across from each other. No one talked for a while. Then Michael said, "I read everything." David nodded, unsure what to say. Michael added softer, "I didn't know." David looked up. "I didn't think you ever would." Silence again. Then Michael picked up his fork and started to eat. And David, with a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding, did the same. They ate mostly in silence. Not the cold kind, not heavy with resentment or awkwardness. It was something gentler, cautious, fragile. Like walking across a bridge that had just been rebuilt with thread. The clink of forks against plates filled the room. Roast chicken, garlic bread, steamed vegetables. Simple, familiar. Claire had always cooked like this. Michael chewed slowly, eyes down, but not distant. David didn't want to speak first. He didn't want to break whatever this was. Instead, he mirrored his son's pace, cutting the food into small bites, glancing up only when the silence stretched too long. Then Michael spoke. "Do you remember what food I used to hate?" David looked at him, eyes steady. "Mashed carrots," he said. "You'd gag if I even put them on the plate." Michael smiled. A real smile. Small, but there. "Yeah," he said. "Still can't stand them." David chuckled, and it sounded foreign to his own ears. Rusty, like a laugh that hadn't been used in years. Michael took another bite, then asked, "Do you remember what I wanted to be when I was 7? "A train conductor," David answered without hesitation. "You made us sit in the caboose every time we went to the zoo so you could practice the feeling." Michael laughed. A short burst. It disappeared quickly, but not before it lit something behind his eyes. David relaxed a little, his shoulders softening. The meal continued, the conversation picking up in slow, tentative pieces. Favorite teachers, bad haircut memories. The time Michael got his head stuck between stair railings and David had to use dish soap to slide him out. They didn't talk about the blog. They didn't talk about John. But David noticed the empty chair at the table. No blazer hanging on it. No voice steering the moment. He noticed it, and Michael did too. When the plates were cleared, Michael got up and returned with 2 mugs of tea. "Mom said you liked this kind," he said, handing one over. David nodded. "I used to drink it when I stayed up late fixing your bike." Michael sat again, wrapping his hands around his cup. Then he said, "She told me to say thanks." David raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For not letting go completely." David looked down, then back at his son. "I thought I had," he admitted. "There were days I thought I should." Michael didn't respond. He didn't need to. The silence that returned now felt different, earned, like a resting place. After a few minutes, Michael stood. "I've got to study," he said. "Midterms?" David rose with him. "Of course." At the door, Michael paused. "I'm glad you came," he said. David smiled. "Me too." He didn't ask when he could come again. He didn't want to press. But as he stepped out into the cool night, he heard Michael call out, "Next time, maybe bring that baseball glove?" David turned, surprised. "I found the bat in the garage," Michael added, almost shyly. David nodded once. "Next time," he said. And for the first time in years, he knew there would be one. 2 weeks after that dinner, David returned to the print shop. He brought a flash drive with the entire blog saved as a document. He didn't ask for embellishments. No title page, no dramatic formatting. Just simple binding. Clean text. A black cover with no words. He asked for 2 copies. When the clerk handed him the finished product, David ran his hand across the smooth spine and nodded. It felt heavier than it looked. Like something complete. Something real. He brought 1 copy to Michael. No fanfare. No explanation. He just placed it on the table during their next dinner. Roast chicken again? This time with music playing softly in the background. "I wanted you to have this," he said. "Everything's in there. Some of it you've already read, some you haven't." Michael looked at the book, turned it in his hands. Didn't open it, but didn't push it away either. There was a note tucked inside the cover. A single sentence, written in David's handwriting. "I'm sorry for not being strong enough to stay, but I never disappeared." Michael read it twice, then folded it back into the book. "I know," he said quietly. "You came back when it mattered." They didn't say anything else about it. They didn't need to. That night, Michael pulled out an old photo album from the closet. He laid it on the table between them, dust still clinging to the edges. "You remember this?" he asked, flipping to a page with a faded picture. It was them. David and Michael in a park, sitting beside a miniature train ride. Michael, 5 years old, grinning with 2 front teeth missing. David behind him, arms around his shoulders, both of them laughing at something the camera hadn't caught. "I forgot about this day," Michael said. "I never did," David replied. They looked at the photo for a long time. Then Michael turned another page, then another. And for the rest of the evening, they sat side by side. Not as strangers, not as adversaries, but as a father and son, slowly piecing together the story they had almost lost. The past didn't disappear, but for the first time in years, it stopped hurting. And that, David realized, was enough.